Welcome to Jane Austen July, the month of everything Jane Austen and reading Jane Austen. Claire is here to join me today. We're going to share about 6 Weeks by the Sea, author Paula Byrne. And Paula Byrne is the person who owns the Byrne portrait of Jane Austen. The past isn't silent, it's buried. Welcome to Hidden Heroines of History. I'm your host, Gayvin Powers, a published author, award-winning screenwriter, and storyteller who brings women's history to life. Claire, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hi, Gayvin. It's my pleasure. It's lovely to be back.
It's great to have you back on Jane Austen July, the month of everything Jane Austen and reading Jane Austen.
There's a huge number of books that have been produced based on Jane Austen's life or Jane Austen's work, inspired by or whatever. And yet, between 1817, 1818 and 1832, her books were not published.
Right.
Right. So we have lost them forever.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And all of this literature that's come out of her world and her fictional world would not have happened if it hadn't been for that publisher.
I love that you're bringing this back because this is an important time. After she died, her books went out of publication. And if it wasn't for him, they wouldn't be here still.
No, exactly. It's the publisher was Richard Bentley.
Jane has sort of come back in another way as well, because with the Byrne portrait that Paula Byrne owns, who just wrote 6 Weeks by the Sea, she and her husband both own it. They believe that this is the closest likeness of Jane Austen. And you and I, we watched the documentary. So we haven't said which way we go on this, whether we think it is Jane Austen's likeness or not. So we're going to reveal to the listeners right now what our take is based upon the evidence that Paula Byrne had presented in the documentary that the BBC did. So Claire, you go ahead and give your take on it, and then I'm going to go ahead and give my take on it.
This picture was bought for Paula Byrne by her husband for £2,000. I think you said that in a previous
Yes.
podcast.
Yes.
And I was very skeptical. Because as far as I knew, there was only the one portrait that was drawn by Cassandra, and that was the one that everybody accepted. And it was very interesting watching that documentary, which is available on YouTube if anyone wants to watch it, because the only people in the Austen family who did have their portrait taken were the men. There was no reason for Jane or Cassandra to have their portraits done officially because they didn't get married. If they were getting married, then they would have had their portrait done, perhaps in miniature, so that their beloved fiance could have it about his person and keep it with him. Whereas Jane Austen's brothers, a couple of them became admirals. One of them, Edward, was the one that was adopted by the Knight family and inherited Chawton House and the cottage in Chawton, which Jane Austen lived in. So there were reasons for all of her brothers to have their portraits taken, because they were either really successful at sea, or Henry was a banker, so successful businessman. Edward, of course, was part of the landed gentry as a result of being adopted. So, of course, he had his portrait done. No reason to take portraits of the Austen women. But as I was watching the documentary, I was thinking, she does look like her brothers and her father. I know you thought that nose might be the mother, but the nose, but also the eyes and this part of the forehead, she does look like her brothers in this new portrait.
Very much so.
And also the family did say that Cassandra's attempt was nothing like, didn't look anything like Jane. Right. So I thought, And they tested it, didn't they? And they found that the parchment was the vellum that it was drawn on was the right age. The fashions in the picture were the right age for the time. The paint colours or whatever they were using, they were the right age. So there wasn't anything screaming that it was a fake. And then it got to the point in the documentary where they were talking about the view, because the view in the portrait is quite grand. And you think, if this is a portrait being done by, because obviously people used to do portraits of one another, and it was one of the acceptable things for young women to do was to sketch other people. So you'd think, why was there such a grand view in the background? And they actually identified this grand view as being part of Westminster Abbey, and another building next to Westminster Abbey. And so it was like, well, that doesn't seem to fit. So it's all sort of confusion upon confusion, except that in 1815, when this new portrait was likely to have been painted, she was staying in London with her brother, Henry. Her friend, Elizabeth Shute,
Yep.
had a house exactly opposite with the view
Right?
of Westminster Abbey and the other building. I can't remember the name of the other building.
Yes.
So she could have sat in Elizabeth Shute's window, and Elizabeth could have drawn her, and that
Right.
would have been the view beyond the window. So I
Right.
thought, hmm,
That I thought the same thing. You're bringing up the two pieces that were very relevant to me, other than the fact that Paula Byrne had said, hey, she was in the area at this time. She was by herself. She was flush with the most money that she's ever had. So she might have paid to have her own portrait done for all we know.
yeah,
She was visiting Eliza Shute, or she could have visited Eliza Shute because they were friends. The nose, there is one forensic person that analyzes all the nose. The noses are exactly the same. And then for me, there was two other points where Austen was spelled with an I instead of an E.
hmm,
But Eliza Shute, all of her correspondence to Jane spells it with an I, and Jane's publisher signs off on her name with an I as well. So, and that was on the back of the Byrne portrait. It says Jane Austen with an I. This all makes sense to me.
yes. And on the back, whoever had painted the portrait had written Miss Jane Austen. And the Miss to me makes a lot of sense, that a friend wouldn't just put Jane Austen, she would put Miss if they were of the same class, because that is how Jane Austen would have been presented to the world, as Miss Jane Austen or Miss
It's
Jane.
very respectful.
Yes, and so the fact that it was Miss Jane Austen, not just Jane Austen, I thought, oh, that gives it credibility as well. You know, because if somebody had faked it like years later, they'd just put Jane Austen on the back, wouldn't they?
Right. They would put it with the E.
And they put it with the E, and the paper, the
Mhm.
ink would have been too modern. All of it fit the time, and so I thought, do you know what? I'm leaning towards this is probably the only true representation of Jane Austen that we have.
I feel the same exact way.
But
Yeah.
but the problem is, of course, that there's no direct sort of provenance. We don't have a letter with it saying this is my portrait of Miss Jane Austen taken on in the summer of 1815, signed Eliza Shute. We don't have anything that verifies who the sitter was, who the artist was, when it was done. So in terms of sort of the art world, the history world, they're just going to say, well, we can't definitively say that it's Jane Austen's.
You bring up a really good point, because I think that's the frustrating part, at least when I was thinking about it, because if Eliza Shute had painted it, let's say she sketched it, she's a woman. We know tracking down women's details, journals are hard. Paula Byrne probably turned over every stone because she's a really good historian and researcher. I wonder if Eliza Shute had any journals, or you know how women of the manor, they would write down details like what we're having for lunch and what we're having and who's coming to visit. And I wonder if there's just any records anywhere that Eliza Shute has that have just sort of been lost over time or something.
Yes, and I did wonder as well whether maybe Eliza wrote to Jane and said something about her stay or sitting for the portrait or whatever, and it was one of the letters that Cassandra threw away.
Could be. It very well could be.
So there may well have been some kind of documentation that would verify, but it didn't survive Cassandra's onslaught.
That's a really good point, because you're making me think of something that happened personally in my own family. And remember, Cassandra gave her a small nose. Now, if the Austen family had large noses, aquiline noses, which is prominent in all of her brother's portraits,
Yes,
that matched and her father and her mother, it could very well be that Cassandra would know maybe Jane didn't like her nose. Like, my mom did not like her nose at all, at all. And I remember at my mom's memorial service, someone had brought a picture of my mom, and it was not a flattering picture. And I specifically chose pictures at her memorial that were flattering for my mom, because I know that she didn't like her nose. And this person brought one, and my mom's nose was, I was like, how dare they bring a picture of my mother with that nose like that? And my mom would have hated this. And I just thought, you know what? This person was happy to have a picture with my mom. You got to get over it. But I thought, I'm thinking about this and I'm thinking maybe Jane didn't like her nose and wanted it to be short. And maybe in comparison with her brothers, it was a small nose. Like maybe her brothers' noses, because they're men, were a lot bigger. So she had a small nose. And maybe that's why someone had written about her having a small nose. I think you read to us in a previous episode about her having a small nose.
Yeah, had the smallest Austen nose.
The smallest, cute little Austen nose that Cassandra could make. Just speculation on this.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and that's the problem, isn't it? With the discovery of this portrait was so exciting, but it's left open-ended. And Deirdre Lefroy, who's obviously distantly related, she was absolutely adamant it was not going to be.
For sure. 100% from the get-go, not going to pass the muster.
She was never going to accept it, was she? And I mean, that's quite hilarious to watch in this documentary.
It is. Because Paula Byrne's presenting details and Deirdre's like, no. And I'm like, the nose is right there.
Yes. And the documents with the spelling of Jane Austen with an I were there to see as well, but she was adamant it was not going to be the case. It didn't just come down to Deirdre. That the fact is that there isn't anything concrete that says this is a true likeness of Jane Austen.
Right. We can also speculate that whoever commissioned it or whoever created it spelled Jane Austen's name with an I. So we can get rid of all these other people that spelled it with an E and just look at the people who spelled it with an I. These are the possible people that were involved in this creation of this portrait because they spelled it with an I. That does help, but I think there's just more research to be done and dig into old family archives, family attics, family trunks, somewhere. Somewhere there's an answer. I don't know where it is. But it was really fun to go down.
Do you think that it definitely is Jane Austen?
I think so too. I think it is Jane Austen. I just don't think that we have the letter that says this is Jane Austen. And I think there was a lot of evidence that pointed to it. And it made a lot of sense to me. And it made me happy to see something. But I also think not having it be Jane Austen leads to all of that mystique that we still have of Jane Austen, where she could be anyone and any of us can look to her as inspiration, and her not having a concrete face for all of us sort of adds to this mystique. Also, we were talking about her being written about having a small nose. Well, we know that they fabricated other details about women. We know that they fabricated Anne Bradstreet's details. We know that they fabricated some of Jane Austen's because they were setting up a defense, a protection early on for these women so that they could be read, so that they could be protected in the public eye as they came forward with their works. So there were details about their personalities, the way they looked, the way they behaved, the way that they took care of their children. Jane Austen was a devoted aunt to her nieces and nephews. Anne Bradstreet was a devoted mother. I mean, we couldn't even figure out when Anne Bradstreet was writing because she was doing so many things as a devoted wife and mother to her family and to her community. So there were all these defenses set up early on to protect these women. And so why not give her a small nose? Why not? It could be another fabricated detail. But to answer your question, yes, I do think that this has a very good chance of being pretty much the only likeness that we truly have of Jane Austen. We're just missing one tiny little detail to cement it.
I agree with you, Gayvin. I didn't expect to agree with you, but having seen the documentary, I agree with you. And I think another really clinching thing for me that does sort of make it seem so likely that it is Jane Austen is that she's represented in that portrait as a writer at a time in her life where she was actually successfully publishing novels and earning money and doing well as a result of her writing. And she's represented in that portrait as being a writer. And that to me seems like a really strong detail for making it actually be her.
Right. Claire, you just said it earlier as we're talking. Because she was out of print and she was by a lady. She was known as by a lady up until this point, and she was out of print after her death. And there's only a short window when this could have been painted.
Yeah.
So very few people would have known that she herself was a writer when this was created. So the window closes significantly on
Yes.
who could have drawn this, sketched this out of her,
Mm.
because she didn't tell just anyone that she was a writer. And as far as the public knew, it was by a lady.
Yes. She was actually very secretive about her writing, wasn't she? If anybody came to the house, she didn't mind the family knowing, but if anybody came to the house, she immediately hid all her pieces of
Right.
paper on that little tiny 12-sided table. She immediately hid the papers that she had been working on.
Yeah, and locked it up in her writer's desk that her father had given her.
But Eliza Shute would have known, and Eliza Shute lived opposite Westminster Abbey and had that view from her window.
Yes.
And Eliza Shute was a good amateur painter.
Right. And
So-
Eliza Shute spelled it with an I.
With an I.
Which my personal bet would be that Eliza Shute did it. After I saw it, I even went online to see if I could find any of Eliza Shute's other sketches or portraits. I couldn't find anything, but I'm sure there are some somewhere. And I'm sure there's someone, an art historian, someone who can authenticate the style, the technique. There are people that do that. There has to be someone. But my bet would be on Eliza Shute.
Yes, I think all the evidence is pointing that way.
Yes.
Because Jane was in London in that period of time, so around about 1815. She had money.
Right.
She was friends with Eliza. She surely would have visited Eliza. Right. I mean, it's in Pride and Prejudice. It's a way of snubbing Jane. Bingley's sisters don't visit her in London, even though they know she's in London. You know, if you're friends with somebody in that time and you're spending a prolonged period of time in the same city that they live in, you go and see them just as a point of courtesy, apart from anything else.
Absolutely.
So she would have visited Eliza, I'm sure.
Yes.
And it just all makes sense to me. It just seems to slot into place.
But we'll see. Time will tell. Hopefully more artifacts will be uncovered in time. So we'll see.
I wonder if Paula's still investigating. It'd be really interesting to know.
I bet she is. I bet if it were me, I'd be turning over every leaf, stone, you name it, little whisper. I'd be like, ooh, let me check that out. Yeah, I bet. She's a good historian. So I look forward to seeing what she comes up with next. So
definitely.
Any last thoughts you want to add to Jane Austen July for our listeners?
Can't think of anything else. I mean, we could talk about Jane Austen till the cows come home, but I think we've probably exhausted the books and the spin-offs and the adaptations for one day.
I think so too. Let's go ahead and let's toast, shall we?
Okay.
So I would like to toast to Paula Byrne and Jane Austen and everyone who's reading. We hear you, we see you. Enjoy this month with us as we dive into Jane Austen. Would you like to share anything, Claire?
Just a toast to Jane Austen herself. Thank goodness we have her work.
Absolutely. Thank you. Cheers to everyone, and we'll see you again. This is Gayvin Powers with Hidden Heroines of History, joined by the lovely Clare Draycott. Have a great day.
Bye.
If you enjoyed this, like, share, and subscribe. We have more amazing episodes planned. You can listen to them on the Hidden Heroines of History podcast on YouTube, Spotify, iTunes, and iHeartRadio.